After centuries of survival and rebuilding in the shadow of Rome's collapse, Europe entered a new era, the High Middle Ages. Between the years 1000 and 1300, the continent transformed. Cities grew, kings and popes clashed, knights rode to crusades, and magnificent cathedrals reached for the heavens. This was the age of faith, power, and expansion, an age that shaped Europe forever. By the year 1000, Europe began to breathe again. Populations slowly rose after centuries of war and instability. Villages expanded and towns reappeared as centers of trade. Merchants traveled long distances, carrying goods such as silk, spices, and precious metals. In Italy, cities like Venice, Genoa, and Florence grew rich from Mediterranean trade. In Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League formed, uniting merchants from the Baltic and North Seas. For the first time since Rome, bustling markets connected distant regions. Life was still harsh for peasants, but more people now found opportunities in towns, giving rise to a new social class, the burghers or townspeople who would play a key role in Europe's future. At the heart of medieval Europe was feudalism, a system where land was power. Kings granted land to nobles, nobles gave land to knights, and peasants worked the land in exchange for protection. But in the High Middle Ages, knights became more than warriors. They were bound by the code of chivalry, a mix of loyalty, honor, and religious duty. Tournaments, jousts, and the image of the gallant knight rescuing the weak-shaped medieval culture. Knights were not only fighters, they were symbols of the order and ideals of their time. The Catholic Church reached the peak of its influence in this period. Popes wielded enormous power, sometimes even greater than kings. The Church dictated not only faith, but politics, education, and daily life. During this era, Europe saw the construction of breathtaking Gothic cathedrals, masterpieces like Notre Dame in Paris and Chartres Cathedral. These structures, with their stained glass windows and soaring spires, symbolized both the devotion and the wealth of medieval communities. Monasteries also flourished, preserving knowledge and spreading Christian faith across the continent. One of the most dramatic events of the High Middle Ages were the Crusades. Beginning in 1095, the Pope called Christians to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Thousands of knights, peasants, and adventurers marched east. The Crusades created centuries of conflict between Christians and Muslims, but they also connected Europe with the wider world. From the Middle East, Europeans brought back not only relics but also new ideas, technologies, and goods. Sugar, spices, improved medicine, and even knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. The Crusades were both tragic and transformative. They reshaped Europe's horizons forever. The High Middle Ages were also the age when the first great medieval kingdoms truly began to take shape. Europe was no longer a patchwork of only local lords and fragmented baronies. Strong monarchs started to build lasting dynasties. In England, this process began with the Norman conquest of 1066. William the Conqueror crossed the English Channel, defeated the Anglo-Saxon king Harold at the Battle of Hastings, and introduced Norman rule. Castles rose across the land, and a new system of governance tied England closer to continental Europe. But kings did not rule unchecked. By 1215, the English nobles forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. For the first time in European history, the king's power was officially limited by law. The Magna Carta declared that even rulers had to respect the rights of their subjects. This principle would echo through the centuries, shaping the future of democracy. In France, the Capetian dynasty expanded its authority. Small at first, the French crown steadily extended control over rebellious nobles, eventually creating one of the most powerful monarchies in Europe. Meanwhile, the Holy Roman Empire, covering much of modern Germany and northern Italy, was vast and impressive on paper, But in reality, emperors often struggled to control their ambitious local dukes and bishops. Constant battles with the Pope over authority weakened imperial unity. This balance of power between kings, nobles, and the church defined the politics of the High Middle Ages. The High Middle Ages were not only about war and politics, they also witnessed the birth of a true intellectual awakening. For centuries, Europe had preserved learning mainly in monasteries, but now new institutions appeared, universities. In cities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, students gathered to study law, medicine, philosophy, and above all, theology. The methods of learning were rigorous: long debates, public lectures, and the careful reading of ancient texts. Thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas tried to reconcile faith with reason, showing that human logic could serve religion rather than oppose it. At the same time, contact with the Islamic world through Spain and the Crusades brought Europe into touch with Greek and Arabic knowledge. Translations of Aristotle, medical treatises, and advanced mathematics re-entered Europe. For the first time since Rome, Europe began to build a strong intellectual foundation. Universities were not open to all. Most students were men from wealthy families or destined for the clergy. But the culture of learning slowly spread. The idea that knowledge should be organized, studied, and passed to future generations became a hallmark of European civilization. While kings, popes, and scholars shaped history, most people lived ordinary lives in villages and towns. For peasants, life was centered on the land. They worked from dawn to dusk, plowing, sowing, and harvesting. In return for protection, they owed taxes and labor to their lord. Homes were small, often wooden huts with thatched roofs, shared with animals for warmth. But life was not only work. Festivals, religious holidays, and village fairs brought color and joy. Music, dancing, and games provided entertainment, while the church marked every important stage of life, from baptism to marriage to death. In the towns, guilds controlled the crafts and trades. A boy might enter as an apprentice, learning from a master craftsman, before eventually becoming a master himself. Guilds guaranteed quality, set prices, and gave artisans a sense of pride and community. Women also played a vital role. Peasant women worked the fields alongside men. In towns, they managed shops, brewed beer, and participated in local trade. Noble women could be powerful too, managing estates while their husbands went to war, or even ruling as regents. Some, like abbesses, wielded religious authority. So, while medieval life was harsh and uncertain, it was also filled with resilience, community, and traditions that gave meaning to people's lives. While kings, popes, and scholars shaped history, most people lived ordinary lives in villages and towns. For peasants, life was centered on the land. They worked from dawn to dusk, plowing, sowing, and harvesting. In return for protection, they owed taxes and labor to their lord. Homes were small, often wooden huts with thatched roofs, shared with animals for warmth. By the year 1300, Europe had changed dramatically. From a land of scattered villages and survival, it had become a continent of strong kingdoms, vibrant towns, and magnificent cathedrals. The High Middle Ages brought stability, growth, and cultural flowering, but new challenges loomed on the horizon. The 14th century would bring famine, war, and the devastating Black Death, which would kill millions. Yet, even in the face of these disasters, the foundations built in the High Middle Ages, the universities, the monarchies, the Gothic cathedrals, the system of law and order, would endure. The High Middle Ages were not a dark age. They were an age of light, faith, and ambition, an age when Europe took its first confident steps toward becoming the world power it would one day become.